G'day, Nick here, Animal Engineering. On this episode we are going to be revisiting something that I have already done, which is the jig for the front shock supports. So, sort of got to this point of doing the front shock supports and I looked at the jig I've already made, and you'll see in a second it's pretty terrible. It's not accurate enough in any way, shape or form, so I'm going to completely redo it and make it so it's something that I can trust. But we are moving forward. It is the next step. So I've also come to the conclusion that I'm pretty positive I don't need to have the chassis on the table anymore. The next jig should be done off the subframe to pick up on this and go over the top of the engine, so I shouldn't actually need it on the table, I don't believe. I guess we'll find out. But I'm also just really itching to get this off the table and get some rims onto the back end there and get it on the ground and see what it looks like. So worst case scenario, if we have to, we can put it back on the table later. So first things first, power up the old forklift and we'll get it down on the ground onto some rims. Rightio, well there you have it. That is on the ground, on some wheels. It's looking pretty good. Obviously, she is a fair way off the ground at the moment. So yeah, it does look pretty dorky at the moment. The height, it is off the ground, but I mean, there's no weight compressing the springs or doing anything like that at the moment, so they're at maximum doof doof. And by the time we get the airbags in there, it's going to drop down a fair way, I think. Now, I am not super interested in the frame actually touching the ground. It'll go as low as it goes. Now, I think looking at that, it's probably not going to. The shocks I think have 6 inches of travel, but we'll see how we go. Anyway, that's another day's problem. So now we'll turn our attention to the actual topic of this video, which is redoing the jig for the front shock tower supports. So in my original jig, this is what I had. That going up to that little bit of round plate, and that's on a bit of a specific angle, and that's terrible. It's it's just not going to work, and what was scanned into the computer actually bent as well, like off the subframe, because when I got it under the van to do my measurements, I got a bit excited and was thinking I was Ken Block racing around in Metro with no floor or anything, making stupid noises like a kid, and bent stuff. So I'm going to lock this off, I'll get it back on the table, get it all bolted down, and then weld the bottom feet together, and then I've got to chop a bit out of the bottom of the subframe of the Commodore so I can actually get it up from underneath, and then we'll work out where we're going to go from there. Well, I got those bits welded together on the jig and I was about to throw it in the car, and I decided that this was probably a good opportunity to go through so you can actually see why I'm completely redoing this jig. So originally I had this piece like welded on top of that bit, right? So I had that on top of that bit and that came up into this hole, and it just sort of sat flush with the top like that, you know? And that was kind of giving me the slight angle of that piece. So on the top of the factory shock, there's like a tapered bit, and inside here is actually like a tapered cone piece that it goes up against, and it sort of locates it. So just having a bit of flat there really wasn't going to give me a very good registration of where that cone had to be in relation, like 360 degrees around and whatnot. It's just, it potentially could have worked, but I don't know. It's not too much of a major because that other bit's already done picking up off this pickup points for the control arms, and you can kind of see, so this is the air shock I'll be using. You can see on the top here that cone piece, so that comes up and there's a little shoulder there which registers inside this cutout. So what my plan is I'm going to turn up something like this on the lathe. Well, basically I'm going to make that out of steel on the lathe, and then I'll bolt that up so it comes up through, attach it to those other pieces, and then I'm going to make like a strut tower support type piece that'll go across and drill and tap into the top of those pieces I make, and that should keep everything like perfectly in line. So I don't have any massive round bar, but on my plasma table, every time I finish a sheet, I just, out of all dead space, I'll just cut a circle or a square or something of some random size that could be useful in the future. So I've been through my drawer. I've just grabbed a whole heap of them. I've reamed a 7/8 hole through. So got a bit of 7/8 round bar there. That's reamed in. So I should be able to weld that in. I'll plug weld all these together using that hole, and then I can weld that in, and that'll give me something for the lathe to grip on and hopefully keep it pretty central. Yeah, so that's the plan. That's why I'm changing my design a bit, and really I don't think it should take too long, maybe a day or two, and I should have a much better jig that I'm actually confident will get the shocks in the right spot. So yeah, get that a bit bolted in, and then I'll spin something up out of this on the old lather Rooney, and then we pretty much be most of the way there, I feel. Shouldn't be too big a project, but one that is definitely necessary. Well, it's probably a pretty unconventional way of getting from round bar, but it's what I had lying around and it gets me moving forward. So I've just been through, pulled some measurements off of this coney piece on top of the airbag. So we'll get that stuff into the lathe and we'll turn it down to size. Alright, well, we'll have a look at what my brain has farted out this time. So that's the piece that's just sort of spun up on the lathe, and then I've also made this other piece. So I've drilled and tapped that one. So basically this one comes up from underneath, and then I've left just enough clearance. I've left just enough clearance there so that that step goes inside. And then that clamps it together. So yeah, I think that's a pretty good result. Far better than that scenario I had going on. I don't really know what I was thinking there, but that obviously is terrible, and this is much better and stronger. So now what I've got to do is tie that in with the brackets down there, and then bridge in between them. I'll probably pin or dowel something to make sure it goes back in the exact same spot if it springs in or does anything stupid. So we'll get onto that now and get cracking. Some of you may recognise this piece from previous custom jig chassis building episodes. This was the piece that went over top of the original jig, and these circles were actually 3D scanned as part of the scan data. So what I've done is I've just harvested that, because we're all about recycling. And I'm basically just going to put that over the top. I'll weld that in, and then that should locate the top section. And then it's just a matter of connecting the dots underneath. It should be done. Okay, that is all welded up. I've let it cool down while it's all still bolted onto the car. Added this extra little diagonal brace here just to try and make sure that this didn't go anywhere. Go wang, all crazy. Does look a little bit more agricultural now that I've just chopped pieces, but I'm much happier with that. So we'll now get it all unbolted off the car and then get it into the chassis. Now, bit of sad news, pretty sad and, to be honest, pretty bloody frustrating. The Metro has had its first crash. There were swear words, plenty of them. I don't know if it's, because it's such an old, I've left it looking old, it doesn't stand out super bad, but I think you should be able to see the bloody dent there. Just went straight backwards with the forklift, just nailed it. It's not paying attention. So it's right on a crease too, so I don't know. There's a pretty solid bit there, so I don't know if I'm going to be able to get one of those like dent remover thingies and just go pop it out. But yeah, super annoying. Anyway, get that off the car and we'll get it cleaned up and we'll get it onto the chassis. Okay, well I've got that all bolted up now. It's all nice and strong and solid, and give it a little lick of paint. Didn't have any red like the rest of the jig, but I think you can see from there kind of what my predicament here is. They are up way in no man's land. So trying to make something that's not going to look absolutely horrendous is going to be a challenge, whilst still making it super strong and rigid for the shocks. So I'm just going to put the radiator there for the time being, just to see if I could somehow link a bracket for that in and up to the shocks. But yeah, they are in the middle of nowhere. Kind of a lot further out than I was expecting as well. I think with the other jig, with those two pipes coming off, it wasn't really as noticeable. And I don't think I've actually had it on with the motor there as well to see how far away they are from the motor, but I think the brackets I've made up on the lathe, and I've spent just over a day just changing this jig, and I think how it's set up at the moment is going to be a much better tool to use for actually setting the top hats for the shocks. So I'm going to spend a bit of time trying to nut this out and work out a nice aesthetic way of doing it that's strong and doesn't look like an absolute mess. Alright, well, a bit of time has passed. I went away, done a bit of work, and while I was away I came to the realisation that what I have here, although it gets me to this point, it's not actually really any good for mounting and jigging up the shocks to get them into the van. I've also decided that I'm going to stick with my original plan for the front shocks and build them into the floor of the van. It's just going to be a lot easier and tidier than building some big structure to come out to this stuff. So I have just spent a few days, probably can't quite see that one there, but spent a bit of time on the lathe. I've turned up 2 of these, so these will actually get mounted and welded to the floor of the van, and basically the shock goes up inside there and then clamps down on the top. So for now I've also made a couple of those bits, so I'm going to weld them onto the top of these top hats. Just a couple of little tacks to hold them in place. Eventually once they become part of the van, I'll then cut this piece off. And then I've also made up this bit, which is basically the same as the other top hat bit, but you know, just a bit chunkier, and haven't finished it off as nice. So once I cut the top hats free of the jig, I can then weld these pieces onto this bit, onto these bits. So there's 2 of these, so I weld them onto there, and then use that jig. So for when I do future maintenance on the van, I can unbolt the front shocks, they'll go flop around, lift the body up, put the jig on, and then I can bolt the shocks back up and move it around nice and easy. So trying to design things so it has a dual purpose for future maintenance and stuff like that. I want to have this van built so that within about half an hour, 40 minutes, you can disconnect the body from the chassis, lift it off, and do whatever you have to do. Which hopefully will never happen, or won't happen often anyway. So I'll nut this out. Basically just going to weld these on and then get a bit of pipe going across, and then work out a way to bring that down, probably off the motor, so it's all nice and solid. We'll cut back once that's done. Alright, well, fast forward a day and a bit, and I have the whole front jigged up. I'll show you what I've got going on. So it may be a tad overkill, but I've got what is this 2-inch tube, and then all these mounting points. It's all made out of 1/4-inch plate. And then yeah, obviously I've got that bit, these top hats which will stay with the van, just tacked onto that piece for now. May seem like a bit of an overkill, but I do envisage this jig getting used a fair bit throughout the process of building the van and doing the floor and everything. The chassis is going to come out from underneath it probably several times, so having that jig to be able to bolt the suspension up so I can move it around nice and easy is definitely going to be handy. And in the future, once the van's finished, also for maintenance, I can lift the body off, bolt that jig up, bolt the shocks up, and I can move it around the shed piece of piss. So that's all cooled right off now, so I can unbolt these bottom bits, get them out of the way, and we can get the front suspension and wheels on. So I'm going to jam away and do that, and we'll cut back in a second when it has all 4 wheels. Alright, well, just like that, we have all the suspension in. She's finally sitting on all 4 wheels. Yeah, as I say, pretty happy with that. Pretty awesome. Yeah, very happy with how that has come up. It was several days work just to make that top jig to hold those top hats for the suspension, but I feel it's worth spending the time. That jig will get used a fair amount, I would say, during the course of the build as we progress to doing the floor and, you know, roll the chassis out when we paint the bottom of the van and do all that kind of stuff, so it will get used a fair amount. But yeah, just so good to see it on 4 wheels. So I think we'll leave it there for this episode. The next episode, just going to throw all the air suspension into it and then look at probably try and get it under the van and maybe just get the van body sort of stitched on the top just so we can drop it down and have a look at what it's going to look like. I'm going to be interested to see how low it goes. It's sitting a lot higher at the moment than I sort of anticipated it would, even, you know, there's no weight of a body or anything on it, but it'll be interesting to see how low it goes. So I think we'll leave it there. As always, if you've made it this far into the episode, thank you very much for watching. And we'll see you on the next episode where this thing is going to go to the ground, hopefully. Adios.